Right. So the question is, a lot of the things we address relate to consumer efforts to reduce plastic waste, and what, if anything, should the business community be doing? And I'm going to repeat because this is being recorded. So the business community really has a lot of opportunity here. I mean, some places, like fast food chains, for example, have stopped using as much plastic as they were a few years ago. They've gone back to more paper. They've gotten rid of styrofoam, which is completely, very rarely recyclable. So that's really one of the first things businesses can do, is really take a look at, you know, what they're using in their business and say, is there a way that we can stop using so much plastic and really producing plastic waste? Because, you know, some businesses, what they're doing is going to make sense to use plastic, like Dr. Welshons talked about our plastic eyeglasses. You know, it's a reasonable use of plastic, but we need to always be looking at how can we get rid of the plastic out of the waste stream. So, you know, we see the movement now to not have plastic straws. And so, you know, businesses can stop just automatically giving them out. They can let people ask for them, and that cuts down, you know, an enormous amount of straws that could potentially be used. So those are just some little examples, but really each business, and business has to participate in this. Each business has to.
Well, I guess the question is, how do these things coming out of the plastics I've described reach people? Well, what we looked at were water bottles, so they're ingested. And we've looked at pharmacokinetics, that is, how much does it take to get a certain level in blood. The level in blood is what determines hormonal activity. And there are a number of chemicals really surprisingly similar. That is, about 1/100th, between 1% and 1/10% of the amount ingested as a concentration per mass, it ends up as an average concentration in blood. So if you consume something that in your body mass would be a physiologically significant level, you'd be 1/100th or 1/1000th of that in circulation. That's good. But if you're 1,000 times, 100 to 1,000 times greater than that, there are numbers for this. But essentially, any one of those mechanisms you described is sufficient to give exposure. Oral exposure, or rather gastric exposure, swallowing the material, passes through the liver and is metabolized substantially. But even a 95% or a 99% metabolism of something that's tremendously active leaves more than sufficient in blood to have endocrine or biological effects. Absorption through the skin, is more, avoids the single pass through the liver and actually reaches circulation at a much higher level. The impact of something absorbed through the skin is 10 to 100 times greater than that which is that is swallowed. Did that answer the part to your question?
What about ingestion? What about airborne?
Oh, yes, that goes straight to blood. That is very effective at creating concentration in the blood.
Thank you.
Yes, over here.
I'm microwaving in glass, but I'm covering that glass container with either plastic or wax paper. That can't be okay, right?
It's a lot better than microwaving in the plastic. It's substantially better.
So the plastic wrap is not as.
Well, and I've heard that wax paper is better than plastic wrap. So if you're using wax paper, that's not about the same thing.
Or a paper towel.
Yeah. Georgia.
I'm just kind of overwhelmed by how many things come in plastic. You know, ketchup used to get in glass. Now it comes in plastic. But virtually all this food packaging in plastic is what we're concerned about. That's fair.
Well, that's, to me, not quite all plastic releases endocrine active compounds. The technician in the lab, the woman doing that work to begin with, just threw in a K-cup, a Keurig cup. That was one of our negatives. That was one Keurig cup tested once. But the parent plastic for some of the bottles we tested is in fact essentially inert. It doesn't release these chemicals. It's additives for plasticizers to make it softer, dyes for color in the plastic, antioxidants to preserve the plastic and things directly in contact, and UV blockers for things that may be in sun. That's 4 different additives, and each one of those comes in its own resin. What happens with most of the plastics is the pellets, the parent plastic is melted, and small amounts of these additives are added to the liquid in its own resin. So there are really potentially 8 different additives, 4 different additives in 4 different resins. And some of the resins seem to have bisphenol A, returning it to what's supposed to be a bisphenol A free bottle, but of course at a much lower level. And for many of these things, just reducing something by some fold is helpful. Completely eliminating endocrine active compounds it's hard in one step. But even, well, for example, for lead, every unit of, or every fractional decrease in lead reduced the problems with it in past decades.
And I would encourage people who are shopping to sometimes look on the shelf beyond your regular brand, because I know, like, I do that now. I look for the one brand that's still in the glass bottle, and sometimes it's there if you look hard enough, or sometimes if you shop in like what they call the natural section of your store. I shop at Hy-Vee and they have a health food market. A lot of the stuff over there is more likely to be packaged in glass than in the other part of the store. So. Dick?
Is there significant transfer of the chemicals from plastic bottles to dry food?
Oh, it's much less. If the contents aren't oily, there's much less transfer. But for endocrine active compounds, it's just a technical matter. They have to be able to get into the cell. In order to do that, they have to be soluble in the membrane, which means they have to be kind of hydrophobic or oily. So oily contents are particularly good at transferring material out. Dry contents will transfer vastly less.
Any other questions? Yeah, up here.
For Professor, can you disclose whether or not you had used the so-called plant-based plastic bottles?
Oh no, we haven't yet.
Oh, you have or have not?
Oh, have not.
Oh, can you speak at all about that? I mean, I'm not advocating for it, but...
Could you clear up what he's asking, so for the rest of us who don't know?
Oh,
Sorry.
You're asking about bottle matrices made from, say, polymerized sugars, or
Yeah.
I'm not sure what they are. We've only looked at petroleum derived bottles so far.
One of the things we're looking at for the climate action and adaptation plan, not to keep coming back to that, but it's always on my mind these days, because one of the things, of course, is to reduce waste, is we're looking at a lot of education campaigns for the public, but one of the things is the city can't afford to do all those on its own. So, the more that we get volunteers that help, like the presenters earlier were part of the Recycling Ambassador program, where they volunteer to go out and talk to people about, why recycle and how to do it right. So I think that's something that as we go forward, you might ask yourself how you'd like to get involved with the city to help with some of these things, because we have a lot of work to do to reduce our waste and reduce our emissions by 2050, and it's going to take the whole community acting together, not only with individual choices, but getting out there and talking to people. So I want to thank you again for your participation. And I hope you found it informative, and thanks for coming to the fair. There's more workshops later.